presentation before the discussion session. So hopefully we can, it won't be a very long presentation as you will see, but hopefully we'll have important information here for you. So right now we'll be talking about the range assessment and planning for the Boreal Shield SK1. So we basically set up our presentation so that we're following sort of a similar template, and you can see how we're stepping through those 6 different steps of both the range assessment and range plan. And you will probably have seen this map multiple times. It's on page 3 of your handout on the left-hand side, just to reinforce for you where the SK1 Boreal Shield range is, and as well as SK2. So right now we are further up north, we're in the SK1 range. And on the right-hand side, that map basically shows you the eco-district or landscape areas. So if you remember from Gigi's presentation, we are doing range assessment, looking at characterizing the risk based on those eco-districts. So the first step of the range assessment is issue scoping. And for the Boreal Shield, there's feedback. I have... Sorry about that. So for the issue scoping for Boreal Shield, the initial issue scoping is conducted internally by the ministry, and the issues that we have for SK1 largely overlaps with the issues that have already been identified in the federal recovery strategy as well as our provincial conservation strategy. In SK1, there's information gap that has been identified in the schedule of study in the federal recovery strategy, and I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with the schedule of studies. And there is also a need to gather population information for caribou as well as habitat use for caribou in the Shield. So as Pam had alluded to earlier in her question period, that it has been identified that SK1 has high fire cycle compared to other areas of the Boreal Shield ecosystem across Canada. So we need to have better and more accurate fire mapping, and as well as man-made disturbance mapping for this region. And this will, having this information will basically give us a better picture of what habitat are available to caribou in the Shield. So some of these studies that I will go into a little bit further, as well as the posters on the left-hand side here, are very long-term in nature, and the results will be gathered until 2018, 2019. And we will have some preliminary population as well as habitat results in 2016 to fulfill the Environment Canada 2016 schedule of studies. So the second step in range assessment process is to characterize range condition. And this is where I'm going to go into more of the details of the overview of these research studies. And many of these studies are led by university researchers. Initially in 2012, the ministry basically established a Woodland Caribou Technical Committee with researchers as well as some ministry staff to basically look at the federal recovery strategy, look at our provincial conservation strategy, and come up with some questions. And we have also met with industry, quite a few sessions, to identify some of those information gaps. So the studies that we have here are a combination of those kind of discussion. And the information that we will be using and looking at will be basically including and looking at variables that affect caribou habitat, so human and fire disturbance. And so I'm going to go into some of these overview of the study. Again, what I'm going through here is going to be preliminary because a lot of these studies are long-term in nature, and we want to work with you guys to basically look at some of these questions. There's a lot of good discussion questions that had occurred during the last session when Gigi was talking about the Boreal Plain, about buffer, about some of these roads or even landscape questions that I think we should stress, and I believe Gigi has done so, that we will be working with stakeholders, land users on the area to actually come up with some solution. This is not just a ministry-led initiative, it is a collaborative effort. So I'll give you the overview of some of these research, but again, Phil McLaughlin is sitting right here, and he is one of the lead researcher in the Boreal Shield project, and he will be standing up here at 4 o'clock with his graduate students, and we also have graduate students of the other research work that will be coming here at 4 o'clock that will be standing beside their posters and being able to interact with you during our discussion session. So the first, in the Boreal Shield, we have undertaken a very huge initiative in working on looking at the population question as well as habitat use of caribou in the Boreal Shield. So there's a large study that we had obtained. It's a rather large funding initiative, I guess, or research collaborative funding with the Environment Canada and CERC. And so this map here basically shows you the study area in the Boreal Shield. So we actually have study sites located, so from Cree Lake to Wollaston Lake down to Island Falls. It's a huge area, and there's 6 study area blocks in here, and each block basically have different degrees of natural and man-made disturbance, and we're looking at how caribou are using the landscape within those different blocks to understand further how fire and natural disturbance are affecting caribou movement as well as the population trend. So the population assessment work is led by Dr. Phil McLaughlin at the University of Saskatchewan. The work will be going from 2014 to 2018 and 19. So very, very preliminary here. Phil can talk to you more about it when you can talk to him one-on-one at the poster. In 2014, we started the work. 94 caribou collars were put out. And in 2016, we will be providing some preliminary report on the population information, and in 2018 will be the final report. So this research is mainly directed at addressing the information gaps about caribou habitat and population dynamics in the SK1 region. And this is well aligned with information that's required by the Federal Recovery Strategy for Caribou. So the main goal is to increase our understanding of how caribou habitat and population respond to high natural but low man-made disturbance. So not only will we be monitoring the caribou using radio telemetry, we will also be collecting fecal pellets during the sample, and it is a collaborative effort so that we can look at some of the course-level genetic analysis for the Boreal Shield, similar to what Gigi had talked about for the Boreal Plain, looking at the population structure for the caribou. So this work will basically help answer our strategic question of what is the population status and trend of woodland caribou in the Boreal Shield. So this is just one of the update research slide from Phil. If you look at, it's really hard to see it, but the delineation of the study area is here. Those are the 6 blocks of study site with different levels of man-made disturbance as well as fire disturbance. Thank you. And so there's been 26 wolves radio collared in the area, and the radio collared wolves are in white. Those are the white dots on the landscape. And the pink dots are the 94 caribou that were captured in the March of 2014. So just to give you a reference, here's Cree Lake, and that's Wollaston Lake. So this is going to be an ongoing study, and Phil can probably talk to you a lot more about the movement so far that they've documented. There hasn't been a lot of mortality associated with the caribous. So there's also another component of Phil's research, and that's to look at predator-prey relationship. As a gentleman over at this table have talked about, we need to look at the ecosystem and looking at the predator. So Phil has, as I mentioned, had collared the wolves. We'll be doing some density survey on wolves, and he'll also be working on looking at movement and habitat use of bears in the area, and the work will begin next year on looking at those bears. So there's been some implications elsewhere that some of the impact of predator on caribou might be driven by bears instead of wolves, and so we want to make sure not to blame the wrong predator for some of the decline in caribou. Anyways, this program will provide survival, caribou movement, and habitat use data for the province to be submitted to Environment Canada. So the next piece of work that we're looking at, and that won't be starting until much later in the 2018, will be the population structure work. It's very similar to some of the population structure work that we have undertaken in the Boreal Plain. And it will be led by Dr. Michelin Mansol at the University of Manitoba, as well as Paul Wilson at Trent University. So again, we're trying to identify local population. Once we figure out the movement of the caribou as well as the population trend, we want to be able to delineate sort of local population on the shield to find out how many, how are we going to best manage it. As you recall from our previous presentation on the Boreal Plain, we basically had drawn some lines, administrative lines within SK2 to help us do range plan. But we're hoping for Boreal Shield, if we have the information of, there might be a natural area where the population would be, there will be what we consider as local population, so we can manage those better instead of drawing arbitrary lines on the Boreal Shield. So at this stage, we don't know how many lines there's going to be or how many populations for Boreal Shield until we do some of these work. So again, with the population structure, we're looking at identifying local population as well as looking at the relationship between population, looking at connectivity and things like that. And we're using non-invasively collected DNA samples. We are actually collaborating a lot. I mean, the researchers are collaborating with each other. So a lot of the fecal pellets that Phil had collected during his capture of the 94 caribou, we have those fecal pellets that we can use for doing this work, so we don't have to go out there and redo our effort. So another component of the U of S large NSERC CRD project is the habitat component. And Dr. Jill Johnstone at the university is working closely with Dr. Phil McLaughlin in looking at caribou habitat and fire disturbance. The project goes at the same time frame, 2014 to 2018-19, and it is to relate the post-fire with caribou habitat availability. So one of the main questions is how disturbance plays a role in modifying the relationship between caribou and habitat use is very poorly known. And so what we wanted to do is find out specifically how does the habitat responses of fire in these areas occur, because that's how you can understand how caribou would use their habitat. And also fire activity is known to affect the food available to the caribou as well as habitat quality for caribou. So Dr. Johnstone will actually be doing a whole bunch of vegetative sampling throughout the Boreal Shield, and she'll be working with our Forest Service folks using our same ecosite classification scheme to develop these spatial layers for the SK1 region so that we have more updated spatial data for the shield. Because the shield is non-commercial, we don't have a lot of those information. It's full of non-commercial forests, not like the Boreal Plain where we actually have inventory for forestry purposes. So Jill's work will basically be combined with the radio collaring project to provide better linkages between habitat and population analysis. And her work will basically give us some insight into where caribou habitat is in the shield, and is it possible to use predictive ecosite mapping to determine where caribou habitat is, and also what are the short and long-term effects of fire, such as frequency of fire, the size of the fire, and severity of fire on caribou habitat. These are all questions that we don't have answers to right now, and hoping that Jill and Phil's work will give us some of those answers. So again, with Jill's work in 2016, we hopefully will have an interim potential caribou habitat layer that we can submit to Environment Canada at the same time to fulfill the schedule of studies of the National Recovery Strategy. And in 2018, we will have final caribou habitat areas for the shield. The next component of the work is the collection of traditional knowledge and local knowledge. And this work is led by Ryan Brook at the university, and he's the same researcher that will be leading the collection of Aboriginal traditional knowledge and local knowledge for both the shield and the plain. And he will be coming at 4 o'clock as well, and there's 2 posters over there. with him, his PhD student, that will be working on this question about how to properly and effectively map out, using traditional knowledge, caribou habitat and potential use of habitat by caribou, because we don't have a lot of resources to go out there and radio collar every single animals or collect every single fecal pellet. So we need to rely on local knowledge to help us with that. So we also have work that is very similar to the boreal plain. We just need all these similar components before we can look at the range assessment. So fire mapping is another very, very important, if not most important, issue that we need to tackle in the boreal shield. As I mentioned earlier, the boreal shield has very high fire cycle. And previous fire mapping methods that we have, or the fire mapping methods or even products that Environment Canada used to delineate the boundaries of fire events were provided by the Ministry of Environment. And our method was using basically GPS in an aircraft flying the boundaries of the fire, getting the boundaries of fire, but not knowing what are the residuals or unburned patches within the boreal shield. And for the boreal shield, there potentially could be a much higher percentage of unburned patches compared to the plain, because there is a lack of fire suppression activity in the shield. So this work is actually been undertaken by the ministry, contracted to HabTag consulting firm to basically do a residual fire mapping for the shield. Our initial first contract with the HabTag was to focus on those 6 study areas that Phil and Jill's work is in for the radiotelemetry work. And so that has been completed. And so right now we have another contract with HabTag to finish the rest of the boreal shield areas to get those better idea of what are the residual areas that hasn't been burned. And so this work will basically help us determine, but look at the threshold questions for the boreal shield, and the results will be connected to the NSERC caribou and habitat projects. The next one is the human disturbance mapping, and this is similar to what Gigi had mentioned. This work was started in 2010 prior to the Woodland Caribou project because of the Boreal initiative, as well as the Northwest Regional Cumulative Effects planning work. So we're lucky that we already had a head start on looking at disturbance and mapping out all the disturbance on the landscape. And we're basically looking at a much finer resolution than Environment Canada, similar to what Gigi had mentioned earlier. So anyways, the work in this area is ongoing, and it will probably take us probably another year to finish it. It depends on some of the imageries we don't have access to it, and we have to wait for the cycle before we can get the next set of imagery. And some of the images that we have already analyzed, we need to basically go in there and do a quality control and check before we actually determine that is a correct disturbance and map it in-house. So this work the end result of this work will provide us with a more accurate picture of the disturbance level in the province, and will provide a linkage to the development of range plans. And so similar to the boreal plain, we are going to basically use whatever information we have paired with Environment Canada's if there's gap, and then be able to do an initial assessment of disturbance in the landscape. So you've seen this figure multiple times. I just want to show it to you again. So we're working on population status trends, habitat mapping. We have the anthropogenic disturbance mapping, and then fire disturbance mapping. As earlier I mentioned, some of the timelines is that we might not be completing. We're not going to be finished with the fire mapping until sometime in mid-2015, and then the anthropogenic disturbance mapping, we can probably have some products in 2015 as well. However, the population status and some of the other population work, we won't have a preliminary first stab at it until 2016. But we can do some initial risk assessment for boreal shield soon, and we'll probably initiate that in 2015. So the deliverables for Boreal Shield in 2016 is preliminary population results from the NSERC CRD, the human and fire disturbance maps that we're doing in-house. We will have preliminary habitat use patterns based on Phil and Jill's work. We will take all these information and overlay them and do the cumulative effects modeling, just like what we have done in the Boreal Plain, and have a preliminary assessment results of the current state in 2016, and then also determine from then what are the high-risk area. So we'll do a similar analysis as what we have done for the Boreal Plain, using those eco-district, looking at all the different layers and calculating this amount of disturbance or total disturbance in each of the eco-district, and be able to prioritize, first set the planning boundaries and then prioritize those planning areas to be able to initiate the range planning for the area. But we will be beginning range assessment for the area in 2015. So that's, we don't have the results like what we have in the Boreal Plain to show you because it's still work in progress, but this is what we are expecting we'll be doing in the next couple of years. And that concludes the Shield presentation.